I thought we were the galaxy's finest warriors, until the humans taught me what true horror meant. 20 of my brothers died below Nebraska's cornfields. Children as young as 8 dragged explosives across minefields, smiling at my squad before detonating. If you think you know war, listen to how a single world shattered an empire. In a stark white interrogation room aboard the Coalition command ship, Sergeant Czar, a former Marine of the Coalition, sat with both arms amputated, violet blood still seeping from the wounds. The room contained only 2 chairs and a recording device blinking with a red light, creating the cold atmosphere of post-war desolation. This was taking place 1 week after the Coalition announced its withdrawal from the Sol system, in the distant future. The main setting was the Space Island battlecruiser, moving toward the Coalition Council along the Free Rim. Sergeant Czar, Zetar Zektar, was 37 cycles old, with blue-scaled skin, a veteran of 12 major campaigns, Riel Prime, New Arcturus, Vega 7. He wore 3 medals, Iron Star, Silver Talon, Blood Cross. Now, with both arms amputated, his mental state was unstable. He silently whispered to himself, "I used to be a hero, but I don't want to remember anymore." Across from him sat Lieutenant Commander Velnoth, a tall Coalition officer with deep blue skin and a calm but sharp voice. His role: to collect war documentation to report to the Coalition Council. "State your name and rank for the record," Velnoth said, his voice almost mechanical. "Sergeant Czar, 3rd Assault Division, 7th Strike Force." The words came out hollow, empty of the pride they once carried. Velnoth nodded, activating the recording device. "This session is to document your experiences during the Earth campaign, specifically, your observations on human combat methodology." A shudder ran through Czar's scaled body. "I once believed in the Coalition's doctrine, that war should be predictable, organized, limited in casualties." He stared at the stump where his right arm had been. "I was a fool. The purpose of this interview is not to judge, Sergeant, only to understand why our forces were ineffective." Velnoth's choice of words was deliberate. The Coalition never admitted defeat, only strategic withdrawal or tactical reconsideration. Czar's yellow eyes narrowed. "Ineffective? Is that what they're calling the slaughter of 2 million Coalition troops? The destruction of 300 capital ships?" His voice rose, then broke. "We didn't just lose a war. We lost our understanding of what war is. I used to be the pride of the Empire. Now I'm just a broken shell." "Start from the beginning," Velnoth prompted, his fingers poised over the data terminal. "Your first engagement with human forces." Czar closed his eyes, but quickly opened them again. "I don't like to close my eyes anymore. The screams come back." He took a deep breath. "It began on the lunar surface. Selene, they called it. Day 1 of the Earth campaign." The memory swept over him like a toxic wave. The Coalition had deployed 3 destroyer squadrons to the Moon in Lagrange triangle orbit. Czar was a member of the 3rd Assault Division, tasked merely with clearing the rock field, building a support base. The orders had been transmitted. In just 6 hours, this moon will become a forward base. Everyone believed victory would be as easy as eating candy. But Captain Lisa Hayes piloted a small scout ship, the size of a landing shuttle, straight at the formation. The Coalition guns missed, and Hayes' ship rammed into the electrical systems, weapon systems, and eventually self-destructed to destroy the destroyer claw of victory, killing 3,000 Coalition soldiers. "We were so confident," Czar continued, his voice distant. 3 destroyer-class ships, positioned in standard triangular formation. Our sensors detected a single scout vessel, primitive by our standards, approaching from the Earth side of the Moon. "Captain Lisa Hayes," Velnoth interjected. Czar's eyes widened slightly. "You know her name? It has appeared in multiple reports. Continue." We thought it was a diplomatic approach at first, then perhaps a desperate attempt to gather intelligence. When she accelerated toward the claw of victory, our gunners laughed. What could one tiny ship do against a destroyer's shields? Tsar's scales rippled with remembered horror. They stopped laughing when she broke through. Tsar described how the scout ship somehow penetrated the destroyer's outer defenses. Engineering analysis later revealed that Hayes had modified her engines to emit a frequency that temporarily disrupted the shield harmonics. But it wasn't just the technical achievement that haunted him. I was on the command deck of the Talon of Justice when we intercepted her final transmission. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful as she said, "This is how humans say hello to ugly bastards who threaten our home." Then there was silence, followed by the explosion. The claw of victory had split apart, atmosphere venting into space, carrying with it the bodies of 3,000 coalition soldiers. The debris field spread outward, creating a glittering cloud of destruction. "I watched them die," Tsar whispered. "Bodies tumbling in vacuum, frost forming on their scales. And for what? We hadn't even begun the invasion proper. It was supposed to be a simple occupation of an uninhabited rock." Velnoth made a notation. "This Hayes, her actions were unexpected." "Unexpected?" Tsar laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Coalition military doctrine teaches that rational beings value self-preservation above all. She intentionally killed herself to inflict maximum damage. How do you fight an enemy willing to die to kill you? It was the first lesson in what would become an education in horror. The Coalition High Command had assumed that humans, like all rational species, would calculate odds, preserve their forces, and surrender when faced with overwhelming technological superiority. Captain Hayes had shattered that assumption with a single, suicidal act. "What happened next?" Velnoth prompted. Command reconsidered the timeline. Instead of a gradual deployment, they ordered immediate, overwhelming force. 2 million troops from 12 species deployed to 4 primary locations: American Midwest, Nebraska, Paris, Delhi, and Beijing. Tsar's claws scratched idly at the table's surface. "I was part of the 7th Strike Force, dropped into Nebraska." The first coalition forces had entered Nebraska at dawn, expecting sparse farmers, scattered wildlife. Instead, they found emptiness. Intelligence reports indicated mass civilian evacuations had taken place days before the coalition's arrival, suggesting a level of preparation that should have been impossible. The farmlands were deserted. No people, no animals, just signs of recent, hasty departure. Tsar explained. "Our scouts reported abandoned vehicles, meals left half-eaten, as if they'd known exactly when we would arrive." The coalition forces had advanced 10 kilometers inland when the first ambush hit. A small group of farmers, just 5-6 individuals armed with primitive rifles and armor fashioned from tractor parts, began firing from concealed positions. They withdrew quickly before the coalition could mount an effective response. "We lost only a few soldiers in that first attack. The High Command dismissed it as desperate resistance, doomed to fail against our superior numbers and technology." Tsar's eyes took on a distant look. But it was just the beginning. A supply convoy was ambushed next, with 200 coalition soldiers surrendering after watching their comrades being hit by improvised explosives. Tsar witnessed his first ground ambush, a pastoral landscape torn apart by coalition bayonets. Then, agricultural machinery transformed into armored vehicles. "They used everything," Tsar said, voice tight with remembered tension. Irrigation ditches became trenches, grain silos concealed snipers, farm equipment had been converted into mobile weapons platforms. And the humans. They fought with a ferocity I'd never witnessed before. The most shocking encounter came at Millfield, where 2 coalition divisions, 8,000 soldiers, surrounded a town of 3,000 residents. What should have been a simple occupation turned into a nightmare. Every rooftop, alley, and basement had been converted into an ambush point. The coalition deployed thermobaric bombs and robot grenadiers, but remained pinned down for 6 days. Coalition doctrine states that civilian populations, when faced with superior military force, will surrender to preserve their lives and property. Czar recited. But in Millfield, we watched farmers blow up their own homes to create rubble fields that slowed our advance. They poisoned their own water supplies so we couldn't use them. Lieutenant Kira, a female reconnaissance officer who accompanied Czar during the Millfield battle, had been the first to recognize the fundamental misunderstanding at play. "Czar, you don't understand total war," she had told him as they huddled behind a ruined wall, bullets splintering the wood above them. "These people aren't fighting to survive. They're fighting so their way of life survives, even if they don't." Czar had struggled to comprehend this. "But they're dying by the hundreds." "And they're taking thousands of us with them," Kira had replied, her scales pale with stress. "That's the equation that matters to them." General Krixt, who commanded the 7th Strike Force, had declared before the battle, "Earth will submit within 2 weeks." His attitude shifted from arrogance to unusual silence as the casualties mounted. After 6 days, Millfield was nothing but rubble and corpses, Czar told Velnoth. "We'd lost 4,000 troops taking a town of 3,000 civilians, and not one of them surrendered. Not one." Velnoth's expression remained neutral, but his fingers trembled slightly as he made his notes. The coalition's casualty projections were inaccurate. "Inaccurate?" Czar laughed bitterly. "We were taught that wars have rules, that casualties can be calculated, minimized. But humans," he struggled for words, "they don't just accept death. They embrace it, if it means taking more of the enemy with them." As the Nebraska campaign ground on, coalition losses mounted from dozens per engagement to thousands. Czar began to question the doctrine that war is a limited enterprise. Humans were willing to die to kill their enemies, a concept so alien to coalition military thinking that it had never been considered in their strategic planning. "We moved on to New Geneva next," Czar continued. "A colony world, 40 light-years from Earth, a large agricultural settlement, 50,000 residents. I was part of the Colony Suppression Division Task Force under General Thaxmore. Thaxmore had estimated it would take 2 hours to disarm the population, 24 hours to build an observation camp. But intelligence soon revealed that every family had been transformed into guerrilla officers, parents as troops, children as guides and engineers. We intercepted communications through our drone net about humans organizing family units into resistance cells. At first, we thought it was just rhetoric." Czar's voice faltered. "Then we encountered the children. A group of 8 to 12 children, led by 14-year-old Danny Walsh, had attempted to destroy the coalition command bunker using school backpack bombs. The explosion was detected by sensors in time, but still caused 100 coalition casualties. We instituted a complete blockade of New Geneva," Czar said. "House-to-house searches, detention centers. And that's when I was assigned to disarm a 10-year-old girl, Katie Walsh." The memory made him tremble. She had explosives strapped to her small body, enough to kill everyone in a 50-meter radius. My team surrounded her, and I was ordered to approach, to try to remove the device before she could detonate it. Czar described the scene, shoelaces wet with blood, a child's eyes filled with tears not of fear, but of failing to kill the enemy. I looked into her eyes, and do you know what I saw? Not terror, not confusion, determination, hatred. She looked at me the way a soldier looks at an enemy. Czar's voice broke. She was 10 years old. Medic Thralvar had been called to treat the girl's wounds after Czar successfully disarmed her. While he worked, she told us, in perfect coalition standard, which was terrifying enough, that when she recovered, she would kill me and all my friends. She wasn't bluffing. I could see it in her eyes. The most harrowing encounter came when Danny Walsh and 12 other children fortified themselves in a grain silo on the third floor, creating a web of traps using fiber reinforced with explosive chemicals. The coalition surrounded the position with 2 regiments, 300 soldiers. After 4 hours of intense firefight, the silo structure collapsed. Danny activated a switch to detonate the structure, killing 57 coalition soldiers. They had converted the entire building into a bomb, Czar explained, his voice hollow. We didn't realize until too late. Danny Walsh stood at the window, a child silhouetted against the setting sun, and broadcast on an open channel. Tell the galaxy the children of Earth do not bow to tyrants. Then, he pressed the detonator. The explosion had been devastating, both physically and psychologically. General Thaxmore, once arrogant, became obsessed with children. Coalition forces worried. When soldiers cannot face children directly, what values remain to fight for? The psychological impact was catastrophic, Czar admitted. How do you maintain military discipline when your troops are afraid of children? When every civilian is a potential threat? When the enemy's young are willing to die to kill you? Czar's internal conflict had grown unbearable. If I saved the child, I was endangering my comrades. If I killed her, I lost the last shred of my humanity. This moral quandary had no resolution within coalition military doctrine, which had never anticipated such a scenario. After New Geneva, we moved to the Pacific Ocean, Czar continued. The coalition wanted to clear the way for Operation Final Strike, the destruction of major Earth cities. Our fleet deployed 500 warships of various types across the ocean. Here, Admiral Pete Collins emerged, a former fishing boat captain who had volunteered for Earth's naval forces. He had studied coalition tactics for a year, looking for ways to break the legendary naval warfare rules of the coalition. The night before the operation, Czar was on the deck of the battlecruiser Horgrim. Reconnaissance helicopters identified 80 submarines gathering on the ocean floor. The coalition was surprised that such tiny submarines could operate in hundreds. The order was given. All hands, prepare for orbital bombardment. Target, Tokyo, New York, London, Moscow, Paris, Beijing, Delhi. Collins' response was immediate and devastating. More than 300 Earth submarines suddenly activated their radars, advancing directly toward the coalition fleet, without retreating. Each submarine ran while triggering explosion compartments, turning the vessels into living torpedoes. They penetrated our fleet formation, Czar described. The USS Portland, with just 90 sailors, anchored beneath the keel of the cruiser Talon of Might. They waited until coalition helicopters retrieved intelligence, but it was too late. The torpedo compartment exploded, sinking the entire cruiser. Over 3 months, humans lost 200 submarines but destroyed 47 capital ships, dreadnoughts, cruisers, destroyers, and hundreds of supply vessels. We lost control of the seas, Czar said, his voice hollow. Our naval forces were in chaos. Civilian research vessels, private yachts, even converted tugboats attacked us. Captain Rick Stone of the USS Portland broadcast his final message before detonating his submarine beneath one of our capital ships. Laughing at the end because I know this is the only way. The psychological impact was devastating. Coalition sailors, trained to fight honorable battles against military targets, found themselves firing on fishing boats and research vessels. The humans had erased the line between civilian and military, Czar explained. Every vessel became a weapon, every sailor a potential suicide attacker. Lieutenant Kira, usually composed, had trembled when she told Czar, "We're about to face the most terrible naval battle ever." Her fear was justified. The coalition navy, once the pride of the Galactic Empire, had been rendered ineffective by an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. After the naval disasters, the War Council called an emergency session, Czar continued. I observed through a hololink as High Admiral Keithvar presented 12 terabytes of human warfare history: Cold Wars, Civil Wars, World Wars, Galactic Wars. The analysts and strategists nearly fell from their chairs when watching footage of humans burning cities, then forcing the public to witness the killing. Tsar had seen a statistical chart showing how many times humans had fought each other over 12,000 years, with only 37 years of temporary peace. The revelation had broken something in him. He had screamed, "How can they be like this for millennia? War is their blood!" Through the hologram, General Nathan Brooks appeared, tall, with vacant eyes, but a clear voice. "We do not consider war a tool. War is our species' essence." High Admiral Keithvar had trembled as he read, "We would rather conquer than negotiate." His eyes were vacant with fear for the coalition's future. Brooks sent us the entire military history of humanity, Tsar explained to Velnoth. 12,000 years of warfare, species fighting species, nations fighting nations, brothers killing brothers. And do you know what terrified us most? They've never stopped. Not once in their entire history have they known true peace. The Coalition War Council had watched in horror as the data revealed humanity's endless capacity for conflict, innovation in killing, and willingness to accept massive casualties as simply the cost of victory. What had begun as a simple colonial expansion had turned into an existential threat to the coalition itself. General Brooks told us, "If you continue, we will not just defend, we will conquer your worlds." There was no anger in his voice, no emotion at all, just certainty. Tsar shuddered at the memory. That's when the coalition formally announced withdrawal. The falling action began with the coalition officially announcing retreat, scenes of lowering flags, reports across space. All troops withdraw to nearest Federation border. Tsar had focused on gathering the wounded, placing his hand on coffins, looking at the faces of soldiers who had held their weapons tight until the end. He quietly began writing Diary of a Broken Sergeant. The psychological aftermath was devastating. 60% of ground infantry became combat ineffective. 90% of sailors refused to go to sea again. A human syndrome psychology spread throughout the coalition, determining withdrawal from all offensive operations. When we returned to coalition space, Tsar told Velnoth, the medical corps reported unprecedented rates of psychological trauma. Soldiers who couldn't sleep, sailors who wouldn't board ships, officers who resigned their commissions rather than face another deployment. His voice dropped to a whisper. I still hear the children singing before they detonate their bombs. I still see bodies floating in space. Lieutenant Kira had been reassigned to the medical corps to help treat psychological casualties. She had given Tsar a few parting words. I used to believe we were right. Now I see we were wrong. The coalition's statisticians and strategists gradually lost faith, many voluntarily giving up their positions to work at humanitarian aid stations. Velnoth set down his stylus, his expression troubled. And now, what happens to the coalition? Some talk of reorganization, a rebirth federation that would abandon expansionism. Tsar's gaze drifted to the viewport, where stars gleamed cold and distant. Others whisper of revenge, of building bigger weapons, of finding a way to break the human spirit. He shook his head. They don't understand. You can't break what's already been forged in 12,000 years of fire. Tsar placed his teacup down, his eyes vacant. I will never be the same. Velnoth could only nod, recording one final note. As their session concluded, Tsar left the interrogation room and walked to the observation deck. The Horgrim drifted silently among the stars. Below lay the wreckage of the ship Abhorrence of War, while Tsar suffered psychological fractures. Heavy-hearted, I don't know if I can ever look at a human without trembling. He had begun a project called archived 12,000 years, collecting documentation about humans so that future generations of the Coalition will not repeat our mistakes. At night, Zar would wake suddenly, hearing the singing of human children on the comm channel. Their final battle cry, "We will hunt you down." Standing on the observation deck, Zar watched as Earth diminished to a pale blue dot in the distance. The Coalition fleet was retreating to the safety of its borders, leaving behind not just a battlefield, but a fundamental shift in understanding. "They thought they would conquer," Zar whispered to the empty deck, "but instead they learned the meaning of horror. And now, they can only hope the galaxy remembers who the real monsters were." Yet even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't certain which side he meant. 3 months after the withdrawal, Zar was assigned to a remote outpost on the Coalition border. His psychological evaluations had deemed him unsuited for combat operations, a clinical term for what the troops called human shock, the 1,000-yard stare that characterized veterans of the Earth campaign. The Coalition High Command had initiated a comprehensive review of military doctrine. The assumption that technological superiority guaranteed victory had been irrevocably shattered. New training protocols emphasized psychological warfare and preparation for asymmetric combat. "But they're missing the point," Zar told Kira during a rare communication. She had been reassigned to a rehabilitation center for traumatized veterans, her once vibrant scales now dull with stress. "What point?" she asked. "It wasn't their tactics that defeated us. It was their nature." Zar's voice was hollow. "We approached war as a problem to be solved, minimizing our losses while maximizing enemy casualties. The humans approached it as an expression of will. They didn't fight to win. They fought because fighting itself was the victory." Reports from intelligence units monitoring Earth indicated a planet already moving on. Memorials were being built to honor the dead. Schools incorporated the Coalition War into their curriculum. Military academies studied captured Coalition technology, adapting and improving upon it. "They're preparing for our return," an analyst had reported during a briefing Zar attended. "Not hoping for it, expecting it. They're treating our withdrawal not as the end, but as an intermission." The final line of General Brooks' transmission haunted the Coalition's strategic planning. "Remember this lesson well. You came to our home as conquerors. You leave as educators. You have taught us about the stars. We have taught you about humanity. The next time we meet, it will be among your worlds, not ours." 6 months after returning to Coalition space, Zar was approached by a representative from the newly formed Ministry of Human Studies. "We need officers with direct experience," the official had explained. "People who have seen them up close, who understand what we're dealing with." "No one who was there understands them," Zar had replied. "That's what makes them so dangerous." Nevertheless, he accepted the position. Better to channel his nightmares into something productive than to let them consume him in isolation. The ministry had been tasked with a seemingly impossible mission: develop strategies for peaceful coexistence with a species that treated war as a cultural cornerstone. During his first presentation to the Ministry Council, Zar had begun with a simple statement. "Forget everything you think you know about rational conflict resolution. Humans don't want to resolve conflicts. They define themselves by them." The council members had exchanged troubled glances. "Then, how do we establish diplomatic relations?" one had asked. "By understanding that to humans, the willingness to fight is a prerequisite for meaningful peace. They respect strength, especially strength that chooses restraint." Zar projected an image from his personal records, a human child's drawing recovered from New Geneva. It showed stick figures holding hands around a burning building. Their young are taught that sacrifice for the community is the highest virtue. Individual survival is secondary to group survival. Coalition diplomatic protocols were rewritten from first principles. The assumption that all sentient species shared fundamental values was discarded. Humanity would be approached on its own terms, as a species unlike any previously encountered. A year after the withdrawal, the first tentative diplomatic exchange took place in neutral space. The coalition sent a delegation of military officers rather than professional diplomats, a calculated gesture of respect for human martial culture. General Brooks led the human delegation. When he entered the conference chamber and saw Tsar seated among the coalition representatives, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Sergeant Tsar," Brooks said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. "I've read your report. It was illuminating." Tsar rose, instinctively reaching with phantom limbs before remembering his amputation. "General Brooks," he acknowledged with a formal coalition bow instead. "My apologies," Brooks said, indicating Tsar's missing arms. "War leaves its marks on all of us." "Some more visibly than others," Tsar replied. The formal negotiations began, but Tsar found himself distracted by memories of Nebraska's cornfields, of the Pacific's burning ships, of New Geneva's singing children. This human, this General Brooks, had been thousands of kilometers away during those horrors, yet had orchestrated them all. The strategic mind that had recognized the coalition's psychological vulnerabilities and exploited them ruthlessly was now calmly discussing trade agreements and non-aggression pacts. During a recess, Brooks approached Tsar privately. "You're wondering how I can speak of peace after what happened," he said without preamble. Tsar didn't deny it. "Your people turned children into weapons." "No," Brooks corrected. "Your people turned our children into soldiers when you threatened their homes." "There's a difference," he sighed, suddenly looking older. "We don't want war, Sergeant. No one does. But we're prepared for it in ways your coalition never understood." "Because you've never known peace," Tsar said, repeating the insight that had shaken the Coalition War Council. Brooks smiled thinly. "On the contrary, we understand peace precisely because we understand war. They're not opposites, but complementary states. One defines the other." He leaned closer. "Your coalition saw peace as the natural state, war as the aberration. That's why you were unprepared for what we did. We see both as constant possibilities, always present, always demanding preparation." The negotiations continued for weeks, eventually producing the Neutral Zone Accords, establishing a buffer region between human and coalition space. Neither side would colonize within this zone, and joint scientific missions would be permitted under strict protocols. It wasn't peace, not truly, but it was a recognition of mutual capability and mutual restraint, the beginning of understanding between fundamentally different mindsets. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Brooks sought out Tsar one final time. "I wanted to ask you something," the general said. "Something that's been bothering me since I read your report." "What is that?" Tsar asked. "You mentioned a child on New Geneva, Katie Walsh. You said she spoke to you in Coalition Standard." Brooks' expression was troubled. "How is that possible? We had no coalition language databases at that time." Tsar felt a chill run through him. "She spoke it perfectly, as if she'd been studying for years." Brooks nodded slowly. "That's what I was afraid of." He turned to leave, then paused. "You should tell your council to look deeper into their history. The Coalition isn't the first galactic power to discover Earth, just the first to admit defeat and withdraw." Before Tsar could respond, Brooks was gone, leaving him with a revelation more disturbing than anything he'd experienced during the war. If humans had encountered other galactic civilizations before the Coalition, where were those civilizations now? The question haunted him as he returned to Coalition space, bearing both the negotiated accords and a new, unspoken fear. The Coalition had survived its encounter with humanity by recognizing the threat and withdrawing. Had others lacked that wisdom? Or had humanity been different then, less prepared, less unified, less determined? In his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel, Czar recorded a final entry in his personal log. We thought we were teaching them about interstellar civilization. In reality, they were teaching us about survival. The question now is whether we're capable of learning what they already know. That peace is not the absence of war, but the wisdom to choose when to fight and when to retreat. The humans call it the long game. And I suspect they've been playing it for far longer than 12,000 years. The next day, Czar submitted his resignation from active service. His request for transfer to the Coalition Historical Archives was approved without question. Few officers wanted a reminder of the Earth campaign in their command structure. His first act as chief archivist was to establish a sealed vault for all records related to humanity. His second was to begin a search through the Coalition's oldest historical documents for any mention of blue worlds, of bipedal species with indomitable will, of civilizations that had mysteriously ceased communication after reporting contact with primitive but promising species. "What are you looking for, exactly?" his assistant had asked. Czar had stared at the star charts, at the ancient trade routes that inexplicably detoured around certain sectors without explanation. "Context," he'd replied. "I want to understand our place in a much longer story." Years passed. The neutral zone held. Limited trade began between human and coalition worlds, carefully regulated and monitored. Cultural exchanges were proposed, debated, and ultimately approved with strict security protocols. Czar's research had yielded troubling patterns, but no definitive answers. Gaps in historical records, references to species no longer present in the galactic community, star systems marked as prohibited without explanation. Then, on the 5th anniversary of the withdrawal, a package arrived for him, transmitted through diplomatic channels, origin marked as Earth, Office of Historical Reconciliation. Inside was a small data crystal and a handwritten note on paper, a human affectation that had become fashionable in certain coalition cultural circles. The note, in General Brooks' distinctive hand, contained only 5 words. "You asked the right question." The data crystal contained fragments of pre-human records, salvaged from what appeared to be multiple alien sources. Star charts, tactical analyses, fragmentary transmissions, and most disturbing of all, what seemed to be a warning, repeated in 17 different linguistic patterns, all translating approximately to the same message. They do not forget. They do not forgive. They learn from every encounter. If you cannot be their teachers, you will become their lesson. Czar sat in his archive vault, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of the Coalition, and realized how young his civilization truly was, how naive they had been to believe themselves the natural inheritors of the galaxy. How many others had made the same mistake? He composed a message to the Coalition Council, attaching the human data along with his own research. Its conclusion was simple yet profound. We are not the first to encounter humanity, but if we are wise, we may be the first to survive them, not through strength, but through respect, not through conquest, but through understanding. The galaxy has had many rulers, but perhaps humanity's unique gift is not conquest, but synthesis, the ability to learn from all they encounter, to adapt, to incorporate strength and discard weakness. We withdrew from Earth not in defeat, but in wisdom. The question now before the Council is whether we have the greater wisdom to return, not as conquerors, but as equals, as partners in a galaxy that has seen many civilizations rise and fall, while humanity, it seems, has endured. This is not surrender. This is evolution, and it may be our only path forward. As he transmitted the message, Czar gazed out at the stars, wondering how many of them had witnessed this same realization, this same moment of humility, before a species that treated history not as a record of the past, but as a blueprint for the future. They had come to Earth believing themselves the teachers. They had left as students. And in that transformation lay their only hope for survival in a galaxy that, they now understood, had never truly been theirs to claim. They thought they would conquer, Tsar whispered to the empty archive. But instead they learned the meaning of horror. And now, they can only hope the galaxy remembers who the real monsters were. But as he spoke the words, he finally understood their true meaning. The real monster was not humanity, with its 12,000 years of warfare. It was the arrogance that had led the coalition to believe they could subjugate such a species without consequence. The same arrogance that had likely doomed civilizations before them. Humanity had never hidden its nature. Their transmissions, their literature, their art, all spoke of their dual capacity for creation and destruction, for compassion and cruelty, for cooperation and conflict. They had shown the galaxy exactly who they were. The monsters were those who had seen this truth and chosen to ignore it, who had mistaken technological advancement for evolutionary superiority, who had failed to recognize that the most dangerous predator is the one that appears to be prey. Tsar closed the archive vault and made his way to his quarters. Tomorrow would bring council deliberations, policy debates, strategic reassessments. The path forward would not be simple or clear. But for the first time since he had watched Captain Lisa Hayes ram her tiny vessel into a coalition destroyer, Tsar felt something like hope. Not because he believed peace with humanity was guaranteed, but because he understood that peace had never been the only option, or even necessarily the best one. What mattered was choice, understanding, respect for an adversary that had earned it through blood and fire, and an indomitable will to survive. If the coalition could learn that lesson, truly learn it, not just acknowledge it, then perhaps they had a future in this galaxy after all. A future alongside humanity, neither as conquerors nor as conquered, but as survivors of a shared understanding that the universe belonged to no one species, no single civilization. As he drifted into sleep, Tsar heard again the singing of human children, not in nightmares this time, but in memory, their voices clear and defiant in the face of death. What had once terrified him now filled him with a strange respect. What civilization would they build, these humans who taught their children to die singing? What wonders and horrors awaited the galaxy at their hands? For the first time, Tsar was curious to find out.